When I was little, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. They took care of me while my parents worked during the week, and every summer I would stay with them at a campsite. It was a simple place, but it became very special to me over the years. I first went to the campsite when I was 3, and for every summer until I turned 12, I would go there and stay with my grandparents. The campsite was my second home. I made many wonderful memories there, riding my bike, exploring the creek, playing games, and enjoying the peacefulness. But there's one memory that stands out from the rest. It's a bit strange, even scary, and I think about it sometimes. I was 7 years old when this happened. That summer, my best friend came to spend a few days with us. He was 9, a bit older than me, and we were excited to have so much time to play together. We only stayed at the campsite during the week because my grandma worked on the weekends. That meant the campsite was usually very quiet from Monday to Friday. Many other people only came on weekends, so there weren't many people around, which sometimes made the place feel a little spooky. My dad used to tell me ghost stories about the campsite. He liked to joke around and sometimes scared us with stories of strange sounds and creatures in the woods. I never took them seriously, but those stories stayed in my mind, making the empty campsite feel even more mysterious. Our closest neighbors at the campsite were a very nice couple, though we didn't see them much. They had a fantastic outdoor kitchen, almost like a little hut with a roof, but no real walls. I loved pretending to be a chef in their kitchen, cooking up imaginary meals. They left it open for me to play in whenever I wanted, and I spent a lot of time there, mixing dirt and water, pretending I was making something delicious. My grandparents were always very kind. My grandma was especially caring. She looked after everyone and made sure we were happy. She would make us food, sit with us, and listen to our stories. My grandpa was fun, too, always telling jokes and acting silly. But sometimes things felt a little strange around them. It was like everything would be normal, and then suddenly something odd would happen. One afternoon, my friend's first day at the campsite, my grandpa told us to watch out for bears. He said he had seen one earlier in the day. We didn't take it seriously, though, because he often said things like that and nothing ever happened. We were too busy having fun to worry about a bear. We rode our bikes, played near the creek, and enjoyed the sunny day. As the day went on, night began to fall. It got dark very quickly at the campsite, and the quietness made it feel even darker. By that time, my friend and I were playing in the outdoor kitchen, pretending to make food like I always did. We were having a great time until, out of nowhere, we heard a strange sound. It was a low, growling noise mixed with a kind of moaning. The sound seemed to come closer, getting louder and louder, and then something began to claw at the tarp that acted as a wall for the outdoor kitchen. For a moment, I froze. My mind was blank, and my heart was racing. I could feel the fear building up, and before I could even think, my friend and I were running. We ran as fast as we could toward our camper, crying and calling for my grandma. I thought she would hug us and make us feel safe, like she always did when we were scared. But this time, her reaction was different. Instead of comforting us, my grandma started laughing. It wasn't a soft laugh either. She was laughing loudly, almost slapping her knees in amusement. I looked at her, shocked and confused. Why was she laughing? I was scared, and I couldn't understand what was so funny. Then, my grandpa came out from behind the camper. He was laughing, too, his eyes wide with excitement. I realized then that he had been the one pretending to be a bear. He must have made up the story about seeing a bear earlier in the day just to scare us. And when we didn't seem worried, he decided to take it a step further by making those noises and scratching at the tarp. For years after that, I tried to understand why he did it. He never admitted that he was the one making those sounds, but I'm sure it was him. I don't remember much else from that week because I was so shaken by the experience. I felt uneasy around my grandparents for a while after that and didn't know why they would want to scare us like that. It just didn't make sense to me. Even though I liked jokes and pranks, this felt different. It felt too intense, and it left me feeling confused and a little hurt. They never sat us down to explain that it was just a prank, either. They laughed it off like it was no big deal. Even later, when I brought it up, they would just laugh without really talking about it. Looking back, I realized they thought it was just a fun way to make us laugh and surprise us. But at that age, I didn't find it funny. I was easily scared as a child, so I guess that's part of why it bothered me so much. I wasn't used to my grandparents doing something like that. They were always calm, caring, and gentle with me, so this prank was out of character for them. I remember the look on their faces when we ran away crying. They were holding back tears from laughing so hard, and I think they didn't realize how much it affected us. They never really apologized or checked on how my friend and I felt afterward. To them, it was just a funny story to laugh about. But to me, it was something that stayed with me, a memory I still think about. Now, I know it wasn't some big traumatic event, but at that moment, it felt like a big deal. My grandparents never did anything like that again, and I still wonder why they did it that one time. They clearly found it amusing, but I never fully understood their actions. Even now, I don't know if I'll ever get an explanation, but it makes for an interesting story to share. A few years ago, when I turned 13, I planned a camping trip with about 8 friends. We chose a campsite near a big forest filled with tall trees and thick bushes. Right from the start, I had a feeling this trip would be exciting, and I couldn't wait to spend time with my friends in the wild. The campsite was next to a beautiful lake, which made it even more perfect. We spent our first 2 days swimming, riding our bikes, and exploring the woods nearby. It felt like we had our own little world there. On the first day, while we were biking around other campsites, we ran into a group of kids about our age. There were 3 of them, and instead of becoming friendly, we somehow got into an argument. Soon, this turned into a rivalry between our groups. At one point, one of the kids in their group made a serious threat. He said he had his dad's knife and that he would use it to hurt us. This made us feel really uncomfortable, so we left and headed back to our campsite, disturbed by the encounter. That night, we tried to forget about those kids. We roasted marshmallows, made s'mores, and shared stories. My mom and dad, who were the only adults with us, went to bed around 10 p.m., reminding us not to stay up too late, not to make too much noise, and to stay within the campsite. Once they went to sleep, we stayed up, joking and playing around in the dark. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something strange. It looked like a person standing still at the edge of the trees near our campsite. I called my friends over and asked them to look. We decided to go a little closer to see what it was. As we approached, we could make out that it was definitely a person standing there. The strange thing was that they weren't moving at all, just standing completely still, almost like a statue. My friend, who I'll call Mark, felt uneasy, but said he wanted to get a closer look. He was sure it was a man. We were all confused, a little scared, and didn't want Mark to go any closer. My first thought was, why would anyone put a mannequin out here? I was trying to come up with a logical reason for what we were seeing, but nothing made sense. Just as we were puzzling over it, we heard rustling sounds coming from the bushes nearby. Without another thought, we all turned and ran back to our tent, hearts racing. Once we were inside, we kept peeking out, expecting to see someone following us. At one point, my friend Ben whispered that he saw a figure moving among the trees. I glanced over and saw it too, but it was too dark to tell if it was a person or something else. We were too nervous to sleep, so we took turns keeping watch, each of us feeling tense. The next morning, even though we were all tired, we went back to the spot where we had seen the statue to get a better look in daylight. But when we got there, the figure was gone without a trace. This freaked us out because it was so early, meaning someone must have moved it before dawn. Later, We decided to check on the kids we had argued with the day before. We found them still there, but when they saw us coming, they quickly went into their camper and didn't come out, no matter how long we waited. Eventually, we gave up and went back to our own campsite. The morning was still early, so we decided to explore the spot where Ben had seen movement the night before. What we found next made us all want to leave the forest and never come back. In a bush near where Ben had seen the figure, we found a hunting knife, a pair of binoculars, and a rifle. We thought it might belong to those kids, but it didn't make sense. They were just kids, and the oldest couldn't have been more than 11. That night started off quiet, but around midnight, we saw more movement in the trees again. We all stayed up, watching as multiple shadows moved through the woods. Eventually, Mark got frustrated and decided to confront them. He opened the tent, shined his flashlight toward the trees, and started yelling at whoever was out there. We followed him as he got closer to the edge of the trees, and that's when we saw two kids running away deeper into the woods, carrying the items we had found hidden in the bushes earlier. After that, we headed back to the tent, but none of us could relax, let alone sleep. By morning, when we went to check on those kids one last time, they had already left the campsite with their family. The experience has stayed with me ever since. I often wonder what might have happened if we hadn't been so cautious, or if those kids had wanted to do more than just scare us. They had a weapon and we were only protected by a tent. Knowing they had the power to harm us if they'd chosen to still makes me uneasy. That sense of vulnerability is what lingers in my mind the most. I've always been someone who keeps to myself. I live alone in a remote area, surrounded by thick woods and peaceful quiet. This place has always felt like a safe retreat, with barely any visitors except for the rare wanderer or an old friend's funeral. It's secluded, and the woods bring a sense of calm I've come to depend on. But just recently, strange things have started happening, and it's changed the way I see my once safe home. It all began about a week ago on a warm evening. I was sitting on my porch, watching the sun dip low and listening to the comforting sounds of the woods. Birds chirped, frogs croaked, and crickets sang. Everything was exactly as it always was. But then, suddenly, the entire forest went silent. It was eerie. Not a single sound reached my ears. Not a rustle, not a whisper of wind. Nothing. I stayed still, listening and looking around, but everything seemed normal. I didn't see any unusual shadows, and nothing looked out of place. I tried to shrug it off, thinking maybe it was just a big animal nearby causing everything to go quiet. Still, the silence felt wrong. I'd lived here long enough to know that the woods are never truly quiet. There's always a background hum, some noise, even if faint. But on this night, there was only stillness. A few days later, I began to relax again. I'd convinced myself that the strange silence was just a one-time thing. But that evening, just as I was getting ready to turn in for the night, the silence returned. Again, all sounds from the woods stopped in an instant. No birds, no bugs, not even the usual breeze through the trees. I was on edge, but I reasoned that maybe there was a predator in the area. Bears sometimes wandered close, so I assumed that could explain it. As I sat there, the silence felt heavier, almost pressing. I strained to listen, and then I heard a faint noise, like chattering. I couldn't place it at first, so I listened harder, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The sound was strange. It felt like it was echoing around me. Just when I thought it was gone, I heard crunching leaves, like someone or something heavy was walking nearby. Living in a remote area, you learn to recognize the sounds of different animals, and you can usually tell when a person or something unusual is moving in the woods. Whatever I was hearing sounded like a person, maybe a large one, walking quietly but steadily toward my house. Fear struck me, and I instinctively crouched down, trying to stay out of sight. My house is tucked away in the trees, almost invisible unless you know it's there. After a while, I saw a figure emerge from the shadows. Whoever it was, they were wearing a strange, ragged outfit that looked like they'd put together pieces of cloth and branches to blend in with the woods. It reminded me of a homemade camouflage suit. Then the chattering started again, and I realized it was coming from this person's teeth. They were actually chattering their teeth loudly as they moved, creating an eerie, unnatural sound that sent a chill down my spine. The person held something in their hand, and after a few moments, I saw them lift it and bang it against a tree. I couldn't see what it was at first, but the sound echoed in the silence. I started to panic. I'm not exactly the type to handle confrontations, and living alone, I'm not used to dealing with people, especially strangers. I'm self-sufficient, sure, but I'm not brave or tough by any means. As the stranger came closer, I could make out their weapon, a crude spear made from a PVC pipe with a blade attached. It looked like they'd cobbled it together themselves, and it was sharp enough to be dangerous. When they noticed me, they started yelling and chattering their teeth even louder, like they were trying to scare me. In that moment, I felt pure terror. I thought of all the friends and loved ones I'd lost over the years and wondered if this was how my life would end. But something inside me stirred, a feeling I hadn't known I had. I decided I wasn't going to just let this happen. This wasn't going to be the end for me. The person lunged forward, teeth clattering, their spear raised. They swung, and the blade nicked my leg as I dodged to the side. I was in shock, barely understanding why someone would attack me like this. All I had to defend myself was a small .22 rifle I kept nearby. I had another gun, a .380, but it had been malfunctioning, so my .22 was my only hope. It wasn't a powerful weapon, but it was better than nothing. With trembling hands, I grabbed the .22 and fired a shot. The noise of the gunshot rang out, and thankfully, it seemed to do the trick. The person froze, eyes wide with fear, and then took off running, disappearing into the woods with a loud, almost panicked chattering. I didn't chase after them. I fired another warning shot into the air, watching as they vanished deeper into the trees, still making that strange, unsettling noise. Even though they were gone, the experience left me shaken. My quiet, peaceful home no longer felt safe, and the memory of that night lingers. Now, whenever I hear the usual sounds of nature, I'm always listening for that sudden silence, wondering if it's all going to happen again. The woods I once trusted have changed, and so have I. There's an eerie, timeless energy that lingers over the Piedmont region of Georgia and into the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. The area is still wild in many ways, even as modern life creeps closer with neighborhoods and highways. Here, the landscape is a mix of thick forests, rolling hills, and shallow, red clay valleys, with clearings of grass and old fields here and there. Small streams and rivers snake through the valleys and woodlands, filling the area with life and an atmosphere both mysterious and alive. The region's suburbs push steadily into these ancient hills, but it remains a place where, if you go deep enough, you can feel completely alone, surrounded by the mysteries of nature. With so many people nearby, you'd think it's hard to find solitude. Hiking trails and parks are often busy, especially in the fall when the trees turn brilliant shades of red, orange, and yellow. However, after years of exploring, I know which trails to avoid when I want true peace and quiet, as being alone in nature is one of my greatest pleasures. The trails less traveled and the off-the-beaten-path spots are where you find that solitude, far from the sounds of cars or voices. One afternoon, I decided to take my dog to an isolated part of a county nature preserve, a place I'd never explored. It wasn't an official trail, just an old, overgrown path leading through tall grass down a hill toward a dark grove of trees. We moved toward the tree line, drawn by an odd urge to explore further. As we entered the dimness of the woods, I noticed something through the branches ahead, a red brick chimney standing alone, half crumbling, overgrown by shrubs and weeds. The chimney seemed close, almost like it was just a few steps away, but as we walked toward it, it stayed out of reach, almost as if it was moving farther away as we moved closer. The feeling around us started to shift, and a strange, uneasy silence settled over the forest. Then, suddenly, a large black snake slid into view, stopping us in our tracks. It positioned itself in front of us, almost like a guard. I found this odd. Usually, black snakes are shy and slither away when people get close. For this one to appear like that was unsettling. The sight of it shook me out of the almost trance-like state I'd fallen into as I walked through the woods. A chill went through me, and I sensed that something was off. The strange silence, the unreachable chimney, and the snake all combined to give me a deep, uneasy feeling. I felt like we weren't welcome here, as if we'd crossed into a place where we didn't belong. My curiosity faded, replaced by an urgent need to leave. Turning back to the meadow should have been a quick walk, but strangely, it felt as if the return path had stretched out. Every step seemed to take more effort than before, and the air felt heavier. My clothes were soaked in sweat, and my dog, usually full of energy, was panting hard and looking as worn out as I felt. Just a short while earlier, it had been a mild summer evening, but now everything felt thick and stifling, almost as if the air itself was pressing in on us. By the time we made it out of the trees and back into the clearing, the sun had dipped lower and shadows stretched across the meadow. I checked my watch, and to my surprise, we'd been gone nearly an hour. The strange silence lingered, with not a single bird singing or insect buzzing. I stood there, confused and a bit shaken. I've experienced odd moments in the wilderness before, where time and space seemed somehow out of balance, but this was different. It felt as though something had taken hold of us, kept us within its grasp for a while, and only now had let us go. As we made our way back to the car, I kept thinking about that chimney. I'd never seen it before, and I hadn't heard of any abandoned buildings in this area. It seemed odd for a chimney to be standing alone without any walls around it, just waiting in the middle of the woods. I considered going back to look for it, maybe bringing a friend along this time, and setting out earlier in the day to ensure I had plenty of daylight. Part of me wanted to understand what had happened, to see if the chimney was really there, or if it was just some strange trick of my imagination. But then I remembered the feeling that washed over me when I saw that black snake, the way it blocked my path and stared at me as if warning me not to go further. And I recalled the strange heaviness, the sense of being lost and unwelcome, and how the air seemed to swallow up time while we were in those woods. Some things I realized might be better left alone. Perhaps that old chimney stands there for a reason, hidden away in a spot few ever reach. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had come too close to something ancient, something that didn't want to be disturbed. It felt like we'd stumbled into a place caught in its own strange reality, where time had no meaning, and where rules of nature we knew didn't quite apply. Now, whenever I'm hiking in that area, I stick to the main paths. The memory of that day, the eerie silence, and the sight of that lone chimney in the woods serve as a reminder that there are places in the world meant to be left untouched. Sometimes, a journey into the unknown doesn't offer answers. It only brings more questions. And some mysteries, I believe, are best kept as they are, hidden in the quiet of the wilderness.